Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio and welcome to Capricorn TV live streaming today. And super excited to be back on the airwaves today. I've got my lovely co host Heather with me. Heather, are you on the line?
I'm here. It's great to
Oh,
be
well.
here, James.
Great to have you back, Heather. Here we are for another exciting show. We have Mary Joyce. I know we had a little bit of rescheduling for Mary, but I do want to give a little bit about Mary before I bring her on. She is waiting on the call. Mary A. Joyce has worked for two major metropolitan area newspapers as a writer, columnist, artist, and Sunday magazine editor and feature editor. On the side, she's written magazine articles and five other books. Currently, she's working as the editor of the Sky Ships Over Cashiers website. Uh, that features cutting edge topics, and we can talk a little bit about that too, I guess, today. Her career involves working for a Fortune 100 company, coordinating art and printing for talking children's books in that capacity. And she worked directly with many creative teams, including those at Marvel Comics, Golden Books, Mr. Rogers, Bernstein Beers, and Steven Spielberg's E.T. book staff. Wow, if that wasn't a launch for a conversation, what if ever there was one? So, without further ado, hi Mary, great to see you. Great to have you on the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate it.
I got a
Hi,
little
Mary.
feedback here.
Hi there, Heather.
Uh, yeah, wow. Tell me about the Steven Spielberg's E.T. book staff. That must be interesting to be involved in that project.
It was just plain fun. It wasn't work at all. The only bad part was I think I saw the movie about 16 times, and after a while you get a little weary of it. But we had to make
Wow,
sure that we had everything right.
wow. Um, you got quite. You know what I like about columnists and writers for newspapers and journalists is that they don't differentiate what type of research they do. It's about the scoop, it's about the story, it's about meaning, it's about justifying the research with tangible data. And I love guys like you, Mary. I mean, girls like you, I should say. But I love figures that are out there doing the research and you just not prejudiced to the research. I mean, I find, and maybe Heather will back this up, that you find people that they want to be the historian or they want to be the archaeologist or the anthropologist. And it takes people like you, Mary, out there doing all the different research for, in a journalistic style, because this is the key element. Would you agree with that, guys?
I agree with that. And not only that, I really, really try to be the bridge between these academics who have these huge volumes that most people don't want to read, and I condense the information so that it's very easy for most people to read. And that's been the goal of everything that I've written. In
Mm.
fact, the three most recent books are a little bit more like a magazine. There's lots of photos, very
Mm.
condensed writing, and it's just easy to read.
Well, I've been checking out some of the photos from the underground military bases. I guess that's the one we kind of really going to feature on today. Before I get into that book, I do want to mention out the other one. Just well, we can go briefly on the other one because it's just so fascinating. I love history, as you know, Mary.
I
Tell
know, I
me,
know.
Cherokee Little. I'm obsessed with it. I'm looking for ancient origins, history, everything from megaliths and prehistory, everything. I think it's just fascinating. History just grabs me. But tell us about the Cherokee Little people. I mean, from what I gather here, this is a story of a journey of information here that's not been documented in any way, and people just don't want to touch it. Although there's some really interesting insights.
If I hadn't, I didn't even believe in little people when I started. And then one day, a elderly man came in who's very, very respected where I live. And he told me, no, they're real. And when he was involved with early construction at the university here,
Mm.
Western Carolina University, they kept finding these little tunnels. And they ended up being all over the entire campus as they began to build new buildings. And they also found a little skeleton and a skull that was the size of a child, and it sat on somebody's desk for many years. And one day another teacher came by, picked up the skull and looked at it and said, "This is not a child's skull. It has all its wisdom teeth."
Wisdom teeth.
And as you know, yeah, you have to be, at least 18 to be hatching wisdom teeth. So that
Wow.
was some of the interesting evidence. And in that book, I have maps and photos, and I really hope a very qualified archaeologist will get in there and try to find more information. In fact, we're going to be posting another story this next week a construction man found more tunnels. He found 5 of them.
Wow.
And so I've added that to, it'll be on the website this next week. And again, the website is skyshipsovercashers.com, and it'll be at the top of the What's New list.
Has anybody, like a dentist or a dental surgeon or even a medical person, looked at the skull in terms of the teeth, not necessarily skull, but in terms of the teeth? I mean, these are the people that we need to go to with this information, yes?
Well, the problem is that academics are more concerned, apparently, about building their buildings than preserving the information.
True.
And so they want to keep this quiet. In fact, a couple of young students saw the head of security taking a box a little bit bigger than a shoebox off down to the RV camping trails, and he was going to rebury the bones that they had found in a construction project they were just working on. And so they rebury them, but they don't want their projects to be stopped. And regretfully, some of the best educational institutions are sitting on wonderful information, and they are also resistant to it.
Incredible. I mean, this is information that doesn't just need to be uncovered or revealed. This needs to be documented and preserved. I mean, because this stuff is going to be scrubbed from the record if it's let, and I think that's the agenda, perhaps.
And that's one of the reasons that is the reason I wrote the book. When I found that nobody else had written about it, I decided I better preserve it. And I ended up interviewing 11 different people, and 9 of them were people involved with construction projects on the university campus.
Wow.
And many of those have died now. I mean, there's very few left.
Wow.
Some of the original research was done in 2000, 2001, and I didn't put it into book form until 2014. So again, there's only just a few people left from the original witnesses.
Didn't we have a little hominid as well turn up in, I think it was Indonesia? A little small hominid?
Yeah. Yes. But before we get off on a different subject, let me tell you that one of the men brought me a medallion made out of stone that was about 1.25 inches in length. And it had what you would call a leprechaun face. And in the book, I have a photo of it, and right next to it, a profile of the leprechaun, and it is so similar. And this was washed up in 1940 during a very, very major flood in this area. And so much topsoil had been washed away that they found this. And some of the stories are that all the little people don't look alike. There's some that they said had red whiskers, and the one that looks like a leprechaun may have been one of those. The other ones, they say, look very much like the Cherokee.
That's incredible. You know, it's funny because I think about all sorts of evidence now. You know, we have this Egyptian god deity, Bez, who had this scrunched up little face, and
Right, I've seen photos.
you've seen photos, and he's in the British Museum. There's lots of different figureheads of him. I mean, he's not just one little picture somewhere. There's artifacts of him showing him, and he's strange. He has this like gnome-shaped face, or if you want to call that, he's like a little dwarf. But he was supposed to have some strange acoustic musical qualities, and even funny to say the leprechaun thing, because in our ancient Irish mythology there was this quote. The semi-divine deity called Abcon, and Abcon was a dwarf, and he played a little magical flute, and that would win military battles by putting people into a certain trance by playing a certain tune, like. And it's just like the Egyptian god Bez. So maybe there's a strange little musical race of little people out there. I'm open to that. I really am. I mean, we have these fragmented little pieces of evidence left in our planet.
And we have to string them together and make them into a necklace that makes sense.
For sure. Heather, do you want to jump in at this point?
I'm really curious about the tunnels that have been discovered, Mary. Is there any kind of way of dating them at this point, or do we have to wait for some kind of official archaeologist to come in and, accept the project to get some kind of dating done?
Well, when they've cut into supposedly virgin soil, it's always been in this real red, dense clay. And they're typically, let's say, 2.5 feet across, 3.5 feet tall, and they have arched tops, which of course gives it additional support. But they always look damp and fresh just because they've been under the ground. And the one that I'm going to be including on the website this next week, they cut into that recently, and it still looks as fresh as if it had just been cut. So it's very puzzling, very puzzling.
Do we know of any local legends or mythology with the Cherokee that might give us a clue about these little people?
Absolutely. I live very near the Cherokee Reservation. And because of my job that I had for most of the time I've been up here, I met a lot of Cherokee and became friends with them. Many of them say there are still some little people in the back areas of the reservation, and they firmly believe in it. They were also happy when I came out with the book because it gave them credibility. One of the reasons they wouldn't talk much about the little people is that white people made fun of them. So this gave legitimacy to what they absolutely believe. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, definitely, definitely. Another thing I was intrigued about to tie this to your other book is this sort of in the same geographic area as the underground military bases? I'm just wondering if there's some kind of connection to Cherokee sacred lands as to why they're doing this tunneling, and might it be connected to these little people tunnels?
Probably not, but we do have a lot of mysteries here in the mountains of western North Carolina. We have Bigfoot, we have the little people, we have the underground bases, and we have UFOs. So if you need a little bit of intrigue in your life, come on over to our mountains and you'll maybe experience some of it. So
Quite a plethora of culture to explore. Because one of the things that really intrigued me too is your website, the Skyships Over Cashier's website. I mean, it's amazing the number of stories and accounts and photographs that are on that site. And it really is the basis for your underground military bases book, isn't it, that developed it?
that's correct. The website has achieved a lot of credibility. And because of that, some of these whistleblowers began to come to us to tell us their stories because they felt that the public had a right and perhaps a need to know what was going on. And so, yes, it's because of the website that I learned about these stories. And you might find it interesting that I'm really kind of answering a question you asked before. All of the underground facilities are near or under major tourist places. The one that would be known perhaps even in Europe is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And there's, 4 other ones that I've written about that are all under tourist attractions.
Wow. Mary, what is it about, this is a mystery genre, whether you're talking history or underground bases. Does the mystery appeal to you? Do you want to get to, is solutions the key here, getting
I was born with a huge curiosity. I think that's what gets me into all this. And also very much a desire to share what I discover with other people, especially if I don't see any information already out there. I'm not going to duplicate the work of somebody else. I mean, that's not necessary. But everything I've done has not been really covered before.
Wow. What's your feeling for these underground bases? There are a multitude of functions for them. Is there any sort of similarity in design, function, location? Do you think there's a uniform theme for having them? Do you see anything that you could kind of say that's different or that's similar?
Well, there's all of them are military related somehow or another. The one that would be the most unique from the others is one that seems to be run by the United Nations, and that's under Mount Mitchell. And the whistleblower on that one we call Hawk. And he was in the medical field, and when he retired, he still had lots of energy, and he wanted to volunteer his services for the National Guard. When they found out he had Army and FBI clearance, they decided to put him to work doing surveillance. And he was doing surveillance at Mount Mitchell with a squad of men. And they saw what he calls blue hats, which would be UN troops. And they came, they were seen many places, but one day they saw a number of them coming out of the backside of Mount Mitchell. And what happened was they would come out in sets of 2. And there would be one man carrying a very, very heavy back sack with supporting metal because it was that heavy. And then there would be a lead man with a military fold-up shovel. And there were 4 sets of these men. One set went down the south side, one the north side, so each side of the mountain was covered. And so Hawk and his squad split up and followed each of the 4 groups, and they zigzagged up and down the side of the mountain following animal paths. And the lead man would dig a hole about a foot deep. He would take a sensor out of the back of the the backpack, bury it in the ground and cover it up. And they put, hundreds of these around the mountain. And Hawk said these were very, very sensitive sensors that it could distinguish between an animal or a human. And it just, was very fascinating. There was another group participating in this surveillance project at a town just east of the mountain. And they saw a train come in late at night, unload between 20 and 25 tanks, put them on flatbed trucks, and they drove them up the mountain, and they never were seen coming down again. And the supervisors for this man
Wow.
said that the facility at Mount Mitchell was 20 stories deep. So we're talking some incredible stuff. And before I forget, I want to tell you something that's going on around the world. Our country signed a World Heritage Treaty with the United Nations in 1972. This treaty has also been signed by other countries. And it turns over national parks and forests and historic sites to the United Nations. So even though the Smoky Mountain National Park is in our country, we no longer have the jurisdiction over it. And that is why people are seeing troops from Russia and Germany and many other countries in our, quote, our forest. I've talked to people in Australia and other places, and there's a similar thing going on there. I don't know the situation in Ireland, but check it out. It's the World Heritage Treaty.
Mary, I did some work to try to help preserve the Hill of Tara in Ireland, actually. And at the time, we were going towards being a World Heritage Site, but there was a big controversy about it because some people in the group were divided about it, just for the very reason that you're mentioning of losing your ownership of your land.
Right. And I personally think that we should, as a country, tear up that treaty, especially when I see what's going on around there. And to even make this more spooky, Hawk was part of another surveillance when they were watching an ISIS cell that's just to the northwest of Mount Mitchell. And to show you how well embedded the ISIS people are, the leader of the particular cell he was watching would go to church at one of the Christian churches in a nearby town. So it's quite intriguing.
I think the whole thing's mind blowing. I think the level of infrastructure gone into these underground bases. And I've had a couple of shows on this, funny enough. They came my way. I didn't seek out the shows. I think they're fascinating. I think the public is driving this research, Mary, in ways that, Google Earth and satellites, and the American military must be pulling their hairs out, what's left, trying to, make this all secret.
The military is divided. The group that Hawk was a part of doesn't like what's going on with the UN at Mount Mitchell, for example, and that's why they were surveilling them. And he said there are many within our own military in the United States who are prepared to go against these foreigners if necessary, but that's why they're being surveilled. So there's division within our own government.
Wow. The Daily Mail in the UK had an article recently of all American military bases, not just in America, but around the world, have them all documented from Google Earth. The internet is driving this clandestine operation to the surface. The stuff's there if you want to find it and get to it. It's very, very difficult. Yes, you need maybe some people to go out to some of these locations and at least support some photographs or something. There was one photograph, and I want to draw attention, Mary. It was this, and it was recently on the blog that you sent me. It was a clandestine bunker that was literally camouflaged, and you wouldn't even see it until you're upon it.
Right. Now that was in Switzerland.
Wow.
And they're great photos. So those are a little bit closer to you if you ever want to check it out a little better.
I will never be back in Switzerland ever again because of the price of the country. Ever.
Oh,
Period.
okay. All right.
I was there recently for an interview this year with Eric von Daniken, and it was £180 for a train. That's like about $300 just to get a train like 50 miles.
Oh, well, that's pretty outrageous. It
Yeah.
really is.
It's like, but setting that aside,
But
beautiful country.
let me say something else about Google. I have discovered some really very interesting things by exploring through Google. At the same time, back in 2010, I had a Google picture of a hexagon structure near this Mount Mitchell, and had photos of it, did a story of it. And then when I wanted to update the information,
Blacked
I
out,
went back to try to find it, and it's airbrushed out.
airbrushed out.
And I found this funny, but the road closest to the place is called East, this is an important name, East Wart Wilson Road. And that was even taken off the Google map, at least at most levels. So I found a landmark that I could
Wow.
remember and started zooming in, and I finally found the road again. When I hit on it, it said, one time it would come up Walmart stores, and another time it came up and gave you a wart removal product. So though
What?
Google can
Play
though
games.
Google can be very helpful, it can also be very deceptive, and you have to realize that also.
I know a similar case that happened to me. I can't even say it on air because I've already lost two YouTube channels with 3,000 subscribers each. I've had the stories suppressed. I've had to remove the videos because it's just hurting me financially and it's hurting my statistics and stuff. But there was a place in Kazakhstan, and it was airbrushed out. I watched it literally over a 3-day period being airbrushed out. And it wasn't
Wow.
airbrushing out the object, it was airbrushing something out that I drew attention to across the water at an airfield. So whatever was on the
Right.
grass, it was literally it looked like it was brown soil, but it was patches and squares that were being airbrushed out.
Oh yeah, that's real common.
It's common, yeah.
Though again, on the positive side, we have a section on the Skyships Over Cashers website called I can't even remember it, Global Links. And we used Google to search Mars and found an entrance into Mars that looks quite contemporary. It looks like a major air hangar entrance. So that's one way Google has been very helpful, but not
Mm,
always.
not always. Fascinating stuff, Mary. How do you go about doing the research? Do you rely on people to get in touch and share knowledge for the underground military bases? Is that how it works? Do you
Well,
go?
in the beginning, I had to just get out and do it myself. Now, because we've been in existence since 2008, a lot of people come to us. But I try to get out and do a lot of it myself. Just a week or so ago, I was out following a mountain man tracking down Bigfoot. And so there's a real live adventure that can be with it too.
Do you see this as a positive thing, having all these bunkers for protection, or do you see it as a super clandestine thing of no positive value, or do you see it somewhere in the middle, like a power struggle between forces that you kind of alluded to? Is there any good to
For
this?
for the ordinary citizen, I don't think we benefit from it at all. I think the facilities are either for the elite, whoever those might be, uh, where they can escape if there were to be any kind of an emergency, whatever that might be. And then I think they're at one of the sites that I've written about. Um, it looks like they may be doing experimentation involving ETs and experimentations perhaps with humans, at least with animals, because one witness had reported that caged animals were seen being taken into the place.
And you bring up a lot of stories, don't you, in the book about UFOs being connected to these sites. It seems like there are some that are trying to help out, like cleaning up the environment when there's a toxic spill, versus those that are doing malicious involvement, working against them.
You're absolutely right. And that's why we as human beings have to pay close attention to our gut feelings, our intuition. And if something doesn't feel right, stay away from it, because there are many aspects of the UFO phenomena that you do not want to be involved with. And those that have not had good experiences. But there are also those that seem to be concerned about the planet and concerned about mankind. And so we have to really pay attention and distinguish between the two.
It's interesting. There's another site that you mentioned in the book, the Pisgah Astronomical Institute, which apparently seems to be a front for another underground base, but yet you've had witnesses come forward about going in and finding some really unusual things when they're greeted.
We had one man in particular who had, and probably still does, have high security clearance. And when he read our first article about the Perry, we call it the Perry Center. It stands for Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute. And he said that the article was true, and he was so concerned for his own welfare that he very carefully wrote the statement that he allowed us to put on the website. He didn't even want the writing to sound like his style of writing so that nobody could trace it back to him. And the original woman, who you kind of must have read about by your question, Heather, she grew up in a family where her father was in high security work, and the whole family was really under surveillance, so to speak. She's the very first one who told me about what was going on beneath the Perry Center. I'm not sure the same kind of things are happening at the other places. That one is the one that seems to have the darkest side to it. And it's also the most camouflaged. On the surface now, it's an educational astronomical research place, but you can only get in there at certain times by invitation. Some of the Air Force, former Air Force people who have surveilled it have sometimes seen people in SWAT uniforms guarding the gate. At other times, you can go right in. It's a very complicated place. And the reason that's probably the first one that seems to have been built in this area is because that was a monitoring station during the Cold War. And then it was, it transformed after that. And that one is 6 stories beneath the ground.
Oh, wow. In terms of the locals recording these underground sounds, like they're hearing voices and tunneling and mechanical noises, how long has that been going on? Since the Cold War, or is this more recently that this has been happening?
This would be more recent. This is more recent. All the reports where I've written about sounds and vibrational sounds and mechanical sounds beneath the ground have all been since 2009, actually. So I don't know if the two of you have ever seen photos of these giant underground boring machines. They're bigger than a train and big and round, and they can go through like 7 miles in a day. And some of the people have felt vibrations and heard sounds for a period of time, and then it stops. And that may very well be because this is going beneath them, and after it moves on, they don't have it anymore. And over the years, I've heard several reports like that.
I had Dr. Richard Souder on, and we had a great discussion about underground bases, and I know he pioneered some research too in this field. I guess one of the fascinating things I find out as an engineer is that, like you just alluded to, that these boring machines, these incredibly intense, tungsten carbide drill heads that go through with a cylinder.
They may actually melt it.
Even laser melting it, yeah. It goes in like a cylindrical core and just cores out this, and it comes out the other end, and they like you say, we're talking like a rail system maybe linking these up. That's what people say. There's an internal underground rail system linking these bases to each other.
Well, the one of the photos that I have in the book shows a railway track right next to this big boring machine. So if any of your listeners would like to see what one looks like, there is one in the book. And maybe I should mention the title of the book. It's called Underground Military Bases Hidden in North Carolina Mountains. And probably you can find it just by doing the first 3 words, Underground Military Bases.
Yeah, if you search Mary Joyce on Amazon, you'll get it too. So Mary Joyce.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you.
Wow.
I didn't even think to do that myself. Aren't I dumb?
The thing for me.
There you go.
Wow, awesome. Mary, this when you think about this and when you get through some of the evidence, you have to, when you talk about the people, the elite that are doing this, and it's like It's like, okay, I'll just paint this under one banner. The American government at the top level, or the elite, are acting like a royal family almost. The way a royal family has their own little infrastructure to protect themselves, and all the rest of the people are their subjects. What happened to
I see.
government? What happened to government? What happened to the government who served the people?
We're losing it from what I can see. And I think that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump is getting so much attention right now in our election procedure because he's speaking up when everybody else is speaking only in political mumbo jumbo. Um, there's a real hunger to get back to what we're supposed to be, which is a representative democracy.
Yeah, I got issues, See, I don't, and I say this a few times on a few shows that people in Ireland are known to be patriotic, but you can be patriotic to your country and your land and the physical stuff, and still dislike your government. And
Absolutely.
I don't see that in America as an overall picture. I know there's bright souls like you out there, Mary, doing this research and exposing the good stuff and exposing the bad stuff and differentiating between what's what. But I just see
Right.
the masses are just blindly following their governments. I mean, are the governments
And
that
we
successful? Uh,
it's a real problem. And it's going to be interesting to see if that gets changed at all in our next election. I really don't know. So
no.
I have
What
to admit, this is the first time I've done a three-way Skype interview, and it's kind of interesting. Which box is going to talk first?
wow. Oh, well, I'm going to offer Heather to come in next. So.
Really curious about the purpose of this tunneling. Is it to connect cities? And why do they want to connect cities underground? It seems very nefarious. Like, how far did this tunneling network go? Do we know at this point?
My guess would be that the tunnels are connecting these underground facilities. Um, and as far as the earliest one that we have found, which is now so out of date that they open it to the public, but the first underground facility for the government elite was underneath a hotel right on the border of Virginia and West Virginia. And, a wall would just open. I think it's called the Greenbrier. And, you can now take a tour of it. And if they're showing us what was existing many years ago, just imagine how much more sophisticated it must be now. But as far as the tunnels, I think they connect those facilities more than connecting the cities.
Wow, it's really fascinating to me because I used to live in Virginia for a time after I moved back from England. And you've got all those military bases on the East Coast there in Virginia. And I didn't live that far from the border of North Carolina. So this is like an eye opener for me.
Oh, you're really close then. It's not that far from Virginia at all from here. So come
Right,
on down and
right.
check out our mountains.
Well, I don't live there anymore. I live in Pennsylvania, but I was down there recently. So now the next time I go down, I'll have to check it out.
Alrighty.
Wow. I'm curious about the supply network. Um, I mean, like you said, one of these places has a 10-story facility. I mean,
There's one with a 6 and one with a 20 that I've been told. The other ones I do not know how deep they are.
um,
Um,
I
but
mean,
but the one I've learned about rather recently is the one under the Smoky Mountain National Park, and our key whistleblower for that story actually got photos, and his stories get quite interesting. But he repeatedly saw um, big helicopters dropping major equipment into the park where you can't reach it by plane or by car. Um, so that's how a lot of it's being done. They're airdropping it. He's seen big giant ospreys and sky cranes, and that's how they seem to be building the place.
wow. What about food supplies? If these bunkers are, let's say there's a cataclysm, let's say there's a war, nuclear, whatever. Let's say these bunkers are called into play. I mean, what's their lifespan down there? How long can these guys live or stay down there? And maybe just talk about as in a food supply or water.
They have electricity, they have food and water, transportation systems. I do not know how long, but I assume it's quite a long period of time. There was somebody who was able to get in with a camera, not here, but someplace else in the country, where he saw major trucks, like Walmart trucks, hauling things into a tunnel into the ground, and apparently they went, deep into the country. So that's probably all the insight I can give you as far as that goes.
Wow.
It's rather frightening also some of the pictures you have in the book of the robotic spies, that they're animals or birds and that they're actually robots.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked about that on a show before, but yes, and they're quite sophisticated looking. Um, the only story that I have regards a place called Sugarloaf Mountain. And I interviewed a woman who lived at the top of that mountain in 2010. And then 3 years later, I interviewed three different people. And they saw these animals that didn't look real. And I did a lot of research into it. And that's a fairly common way to disguise cameras at the very least.
Wow. Do you think Sugarloaf Mountain is like another entrance, I believe you said in the book, to these tunnels, or what's its
Absolutely.
purpose?
Absolutely. It's another facility, and they're probably, as I said, all linked. Um, that's one of the ones where one of the key witnesses interacted to some degree with the UFOs or with the ETs, and she felt very strongly that there were good ones and bad ones, or grays and those that weren't gray. Um, One night she noticed that the whole top of the mountain was lit up with floodlights, and big helicopters were dropping heavy earth-moving equipment on the top of the mountain. And the next morning, she and her husband were really, really curious, and they hiked up to the very top of the mountain. And the top of the mountain had totally changed its shape, and it had all been resodded. So they were putting something in there. And they have built huge cement electrical poles, and the cables are, she said, 10 inches in diameter. So that's funding some. There's only I think 6 to 8 houses at the top of this mountain, and no way would you have cables that are 10 inches thick for just that number of houses. So there's something major going on up there or down there. You go up to get down.
Do you ever look at the Planet X hypothesis that we have an incoming large body that's going to really disrupt our Earth, and these guys are planning for it?
I have certainly heard that in many, many places, and that perhaps could be the reason for the apparent speeding up of the building of underground facilities. It could be that. I can't. I mean, who knows? I don't know how to
Who knows? How do you
confirm
answer
that.
Yeah, how do you answer that? The Planet X research in itself is a whole chunk of your life gone just to research it, and even
Well,
then you won't know whether you can make a decision whether you believe it or not. But I guess what I see with the underground bases is, number one, the statistical number that there is, the intensity of the building projects, sheer determination, the level of technology going into them, and that then is driven by a massive obsession. It's almost an obsession, and the reason for doing it must be like the payload for any obsessive industry or infrastructure. There must be a payload for that. It's not just because these guys are maybe going to build something they might want to use one day. It's like
No, I think there's a real determined effort, and almost like there's a deadline to accomplish whatever they're doing. And there's many underground facilities that people who would listen to your program would probably know about in the western part of our country, of the U.S., but nobody that I know of has written about the ones here in the eastern part, all along the Appalachian Mountains. And when I found out nobody had, again, that's the reason I decided to do the book. I'm not going to write books about things that people have already written about. So
Sure.
this is new material.
Wasn't there a big bunker in Denver and Colorado in the mountains there as well?
Oh,
Was
there's
it?
a huge one out there, just huge,
Yeah.
and so huge that some people think that all the tunnels end up connected there.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
You have a
Um,
witness in the book, Mary, that talks about overhearing that the local Cherokee chief would find sanctuary down in these tunnels and some kind of like drastic event happened. Can you share a little bit about that as evidence of what's going on?
Yeah, it was just somebody who was sitting in an office, and I guess the walls were too thin. And this person was aware of all the uh, unusual air activity that was going on around Cherokee, so their ears really perked up when they overheard that, telling the chief where he and his family would be taken for safety and protection if necessary. So I guess you've read the book. You're asking really good questions.
I have read the book. I always try to read the book.
Thank you,
But it
thank
makes
you.
you
I
wonder,
appreciate that.
oh, no, I enjoyed it. It was really interesting. I find it helpful, then I can ask you more specific questions to help. But I also, it makes you wonder, like, what, if that ascertains, like, what James is saying in terms of, is there some kind of list of special people who are going to be taken down to this bunker and, or these underground cities, basically, that they're building to protect people and some kind of catastrophic event happens. So,
My own feeling is that those who have a right to be there already know that and know how and when they would get in there. But I don't think you and James and I are going to get an invitation.
I don't think so, especially after this interview, right?
I think I'm last on the list.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not even on the
We-
Christmas list.
Me either. One of our witnesses was a retired professor, and he lives not that far from the Perry Center that we were talking about earlier. And he quit talking about it because every time he did, a UFO would come over and his computer would get wiped out. He said it just got too expensive. And so he was a very good witness, but that ended, because he financially couldn't deal with it.
Wow. Bringing in the UFO thing, I know on your blog I was looking at it, I just find this incredibly interesting that there's a UFO caught siphoning water off a lake. Now you can see what looks like a beam coming down, and then you can see the level of the water in the lake seems to be lower or dropping. Would these guys be taking the water for these bunkers? I mean, I don't think a UFO needs water, but they're obviously maybe transporting the water or siphoning
Well,
the water.
the UFOs may very well need water, but if you want a better story regarding water, two men who worked at the fish hatchery in Cherokee noticed that the flow of water into the hatchery was slowing way, way down. So they hiked up the river or the creek to try to find out what the problem was. And what they found was at the very top where the reservoir used to be, there it was all dried up, and there was one of these 50,000 gallon tanks, mostly buried where the reservoir had been, and there were pipes going from the tank into the ground. Now, I think that's a more likely scenario for supplying water to an underground facility. I don't think it's going to be dropped by UFOs personally.
Sure. It's like these guys, the infrastructure, the military. It's like they're aware of something. They're building for something that they're aware of. I look at it's like I'm coming from an engineering background, Mary, and I just know that you just don't fund that. I mean, the amount of money that must be draining. I personally, I think the American government has a big fat pocket that's never going to be drained. But still, you just don't put that money into something that you're not going to use.
There's lots and lots of articles about the U.S. black budget, and there's a ton of money that's unaccounted for, and it goes, for projects like this. It also goes for what's going on in Mars, and I've seen enough evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that there's a colony already being established on Mars. It sounds far out. In fact, if people
Not
are
really.
interested in this, go to the website, and at the very top of the listing for what's new, there's an article we just posted this past week. Again, another whistleblower came forward, and it's about the establishment of a facility on Mars.
It's not that big a deal now. Well, it is, but it's not what. I mean, I'm open to it. I mean, I think people are past the moon thing. It doesn't matter if there's something on the moon or something on Mars. It's off Earth. It doesn't really matter. And I think, yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if these guys have help from UFOs, which I think they are, They definitely could be something else.
They've learned a lot. They've learned a lot. No doubt about it.
Do you want to speculate perhaps why there would be some sort of an affiliation between UFOs and military? Is there a trade of information or goods or?
Oh, there's absolutely a trade of information. And anybody who jumps into the pool and starts doing the, swimming in those waters, they're going to find a lot of support for that. But beyond that, it would just be speculation on my part. My guess wouldn't be any better than, anybody else's.
In your research, Mary, are you finding a lot of corollaries between what's going on in North Carolina to other certain geographic centers, like other parallel patterns that you're seeing?
Well, for many years now, I've heard about things that are going on in the western part of the United States. But like I said earlier, I didn't see anything being revealed about what's going on here in these mountains. And that's why I wrote the book. But I think it's a similar thing, just in a different location.
This is kind of an odd comment to point out, but my husband actually is investigating the binary code that Jim Penniston downloaded from his UFO experience in Rendlesham Forest in the 1980s in England.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
yeah, and there's a really weird parallel. I don't know if you want to look into this or not, but you mentioned like Christmas trees in an area nearby. I think is it near the Perry site where there's a Christmas tree farm?
Correct.
And there's also a similar kind of forested area in Rendlesham Forest, like Christmas tree. Like I'm not sure if they're used as Christmas trees, but the comparison has been made. So I was just curious, is there some kind of corollary there with heavily forested areas and UFOs? And oftentimes we hear, of things of UFOs dropping down within forests to be shielded or hidden. But I'm just curious because that's also a military base. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of corollary there geographically.
I would say yes, and I'll mention specifically about the Sugarloaf Mountain facility. It's next to the Chimney Rock State Park. And in recent years, they've expanded the park in the direction of this mountain, so it becomes an increased buffer zone. So people can't build on that land, and it's just an insulation. And I think that that's done at all of the ones that I've written about. And again, I've focused on 5 of them here in North Carolina.
Wow.
Mary, what can somebody do if they had information for you? Can they get in touch with you? Are you approachable? Do you have a way of networking with other people?
Absolutely. If people can just remember the name of the website, it's skyshipsovercachers.com. And up at the top, there's a way to report sightings.
Oh, wow.
and also the way that you could reach me, and I'd be happy to follow through on anything that I receive, or try to follow through. I shouldn't promise more than I can deliver.
What do you? I know, and from the blog and the website, it looks fascinating. And this is, I could spend like weeks at this stuff, and I've been enjoying the blog updates coming through on email as well. I'm stunned by some of the stuff, Mary. I really am, and I think it's important. Do you focus on any particular area at the moment? I know we're talking about the book today, underground military bases, but is there anything that you think is important for people to get woken up about? I mean, the military bases probably is a good thing, I think.
Well, we probably have touched on enough of that so that people at least have an idea of what the book is about. There is a section, again, called Global Links, and somebody from the Netherlands put us on to some fascinating photos. And back in 2013, you'll have to go into the archives of the Global Links section, there are photos of humongous planet-sized UFOs around the sun that occasionally will be seen there. And this man from the Netherlands took those and he cleaned them up so you could see them better. And the shapes and the sizes are just incredible. Some of them look more on the order of a giant cruise ship, because you can see different mechanical levels, and it's not just your round ball or the something simple. And at one point we had compared the size of these to our planets, and many of them are bigger than bigger than Jupiter, which is our largest planet. Makes the Earth look like a dwarf. So there's some big ones
Wow.
out there, and I think people would find those very interesting.
I'm
Go
on
to the
I'm on there.
you're on the page?
I'm on there
Okay,
right now.
go
Yeah,
to
it's very easy to find.
all right,
Go to the website, hit global links, and then you can search the archives by year. It's quite easy to
right.
find.
And
This is
then just
incredible, Mary.
scroll down and look through the pictures. But I find that fascinating. My current project
Wow.
I'm waiting to really fly is a recent Bigfoot story. And if people want to read that, it's in the ET and Bigfoot section again on the home page, and just click on it. And the story is called Valley of the Bigfoot and the Little Alien Dude. And we've got a wonderful hair sample. Um, it's a big gob of hair that's without being stretched out is about 7 inches across. And we put a picture of that on the website. And somebody from California contacted us and was so convinced it looked like real, genuine Bigfoot hair that he volunteered to have it analyzed or paid to have it analyzed.
Wow.
So we're waiting for DNA results on that one.
Wow.
And I don't know what we'll get, but we're waiting to see if it might be provable.
You know, we're having this conversation today. It's great because 15 years ago, it would have been outlandish to even do a show. I mean, you might have got something about it in an article somewhere or a book, or a very obscure book, but to talk about it was like taboo. And now people are just
Right.
out to do real research, and they know it's not going to be done academically, but we don't need the academics anymore in terms of alternative concepts. We really don't.
And people keep saying they're waiting for the government to disclose the truth about UFOs. I'm sorry, they're probably never going to do it unless they land where it's undeniable. And the truth is coming out through the internet. So I think it's real important that we maintain the integrity of the internet and don't let the other forces begin to control it and filter it.
Yeah, if they could shut the internet down, they would, but they can't. So the only thing they can do is try and manipulate and control it. At least put a break on the amount of truth coming out. I think that's the best way to describe it. There's going to be a slowing of the truth coming out, or they'll slow it as much as they can. But I don't think they can stop
Right?
it.
No, I don't think so either. So,
Um,
but one of the other books that I did in the end of 2013 is Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left Behind for Us to Find. And James, I think you would find it interesting. I get into some of the stuff that goes right into England involving Joseph of Arimathea, who was actually the great uncle of Jesus.
he
And
went to Cornwall. Did he go to Cornwall and
yeah,
was it
he went
similar?
to that whole southwestern part of England.
Yeah.
And there's according to the old stories, the uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, was also a nobilis decurio for the Romans, and he was in charge of the tin mines in England. And he made regular
Mm,
trips between the Holy Land and in England,
sure.
and he would stop to fill up his ship with water at the Camel River because there was a spring there, and the spring is still there. It is now, it was covered as a little tiny stone chapel, and it's buried literally in a golf course. So there's this cutout hole in the fairway someplace on the St. Dock golf course, and there is this chapel where the Jesus well existed.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things in there you probably would find interesting just from your uh, interest in ancient archaeology and things like that.
Yeah, you know, I had lived in Cornwall, and somebody had. It was another author, Maurice Cotterell. He told me about this a long time ago. That Joseph of Aramea was down that way before. So I have heard a snippet of that before. That looks really fascinating. Is that published at the moment or just coming out?
Yes, no, all three books are available on Amazon, which means anybody in the world can get them. And again,
Okay.
it's the short title is Tangible Evidence of Jesus. The whole title, Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left
Hmm.
Behind for Us to Find. And
Wow.
I try to be the link between the scientist and the archaeologist and the rest of us who would rather have our spoonfuls in spoonfuls rather than, big platefuls at one time.
Well, Mary, I honestly, truly mean, I think you're doing a great job of that, and I think you have to do what you do. Is you need a foot in both worlds, and it's great because we have that bridge in people like yourself. Uh, So yeah, I really commend you. I'm going to link up the books for the listeners in the YouTube description when this goes to archives. But Heather, you any final
Thank,
comments? We're at the top of the hour.
I just want to thank you, Mary.
thank,
You're doing great work. And, I'm an academic. I work as a professor as my day job. So I completely understand. But yet I write about esoteric, spiritual, historical stuff that's revisionist. So I completely understand the path that you've taken. And I applaud that. I really appreciate that. But looking forward, we talked about a lot of covert, hidden things. What kind of solution would you suggest to our listeners, the average person out there, in dealing with a lot of these covert operations that are going on? What can we, the average person, do?
um, the more we become aware of it and the more people that get together behind some of these petitions, here in the United States there's always these petitions to come along. Well, they can be effective if you get enough signatures. That's the first thing that comes to mind. um, I haven't really thought that through. I've been so focused on letting people know what's happening, and the next step really needs to be taken.
I think getting the information out there is such a huge step forward, really. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
And if you ever have anything that you would like to share through our website, let me know. I would be happy to
Oh,
do that
great.
because it
Great.
sounds like you have things that people would be very interested in.
Definitely. We'll stay in touch.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys. Well,
Thank you, Mary.
today's author is Mary Joyce. Her books are In the Underground Military Bases Hidden in North Carolina Mountains, Cherokee Little People Were Real, and Tangible Evidence of Jesus. Have I got that right?
You got it right. You did a good job. I appreciate it.
Thank God for that. Mary, it's been an absolute pleasure. It really is today. Keep up the work. I just think you're an inspiration and you're a benchmark for seeking mysteries. Don't drop your brain out and just believe anything. Do your homework, do the research, do the journalism. And we need more people like you out there, Mary. We really do. But I commend you on your work and your research. It's a pleasure talking to you today. And Heather, thank you so much.
Th- Thank you
Thank
both.
you,
I
Jane.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.
Take care.